Hi, everyone. Today I'd like to talk with you about another theory that relates to family communication. But before I can talk to you about this theory, I need to talk to you about another theory because this is one of those interesting cases where, in part, we define a theory in terms of what it is not. The theory I want us to eventually talk about is called problematic integration theory. Some of you may have run across it this semester in the articles that you summarized earlier in the term. For others, this may be something new, but it will be a departure in any case from an older communication theory, one that came out of the 1970s, a theory that was called uncertainty reduction theory. Now, in one way, these theories are as disparate as night and day. Uncertainty reduction theory was designed initially as an interpersonal communication theory that focused on interpersonal interactions in initial encounters between people. However, what we learned from the theory became relevant for later stages of relationships as well. In a nutshell, Charles Berger, the person most commonly credited with developing uncertainty reduction theory, argued that when two human beings meet for the first time, they behave the way they do. Again, that social science question, why are we interacting the way we do? Berger's answer is that we're doing that because each person brings to the encounter with that stranger a degree of uncertainty about each other's social worlds. And Berger says that we interact with each other so that we can try to eliminate, at best, or at worst, lessen that uncertainty about our social worlds. In the process of developing what Berger regards as a scientific theory, he develops a series of axioms, 7 axioms, eventually an eighth was added on, about the variables that he found to be directly related to levels of uncertainty. So, what we find is that when interacting with each other, strangers who are motivated to reduce their uncertainty will increase their verbal communication with each other quantitatively. They will display nonverbal warmth to each other. Uh, they will highlight similarities between the two of them, including similarities in shared social networks. Um, those things lead to lower levels of uncertainty. And then we also have other variables related to high uncertainty. People who experience high levels of uncertainty are likely to engage in information seeking behaviors and in reciprocity, that is, replying to the information they receive from the other with matching information when appropriate, or um, equally relevant information. Okay, all of that from uncertainty reduction theory um, started a started momentum whereby that theory became widely accepted over decades. But years later, probably in the mid 1990s, a researcher at Purdue University, his name is Austin Babrow, Babrow, started to develop something called problematic integration theory that works from a different assumption about uncertainty. Whereas Berger and eventually colleagues like Calabrese assumed that uncertainty was something that we can and should try to eliminate or lessen. Excuse me. Babrow and the colleagues he worked with work from an assumption that there is some uncertainty that we cannot get rid of. If you think back to the God's Debris book, where we looked at the questions of what we know and what we can really claim to know, part of that answer is not a whole lot. The whole idea of us as delusion generators comes about because we don't know things, and as a result, and instead, in response to that lack of knowledge, here's where Babro would come in. We make inferences based on probability. That's where problematic integration steps in a way. Babro's answer to the why we do things the way we do, why we communicate the way we do, is different from the answer of an uncertainty reduction theorist. Babro would argue that we behave the way we do communicatively. I mean, communication is symbolic action. That we do that because of probabilistic and evaluative orientations towards the uncertainty in our social worlds. That is to say, that we act the way we do because we know that there's a lot that we don't know. And that makes us uncomfortable. So we, instead of dwelling in that uncertainty, have to find ways to integrate that uncertainty about the world around us into our larger worldviews. And we do that often by relying on probability. Um, I can say that I am going to take my wife to dinner tonight. And there are a million things that could happen to prevent that from happening. Even when I say that, I know on some level that there are a million things that could happen that could prevent me from taking my wife to dinner tonight. We choose to, on some level, calculate the probabilities of those events of any of those events occurring that would keep me from being able to take my wife to dinner. That sounds like an insignificant example. But problematic integration has gained a foothold in certain aspects of communication studies, including family communication, especially family communication regarding health issues. Um, Health is an area where we don't know a lot. I mean, we have a field of medicine devoted to learning about how our bodies work. But at the same time, we live in a world that is fraught with uncertainty. Otherwise perfectly healthy people die every day. That sounds like an awful thing to say, but it's true. The notion of the future that we assume for ourselves is one that is laden with uncertainty. We think we have that future, and we assume, and we choose to believe in that future based on probabilistic orientations. But on some level, what we're doing is choosing to integrate our uncertainty about the future with a worldview that says that even though who knows what might happen, we wouldn't find it healthy to dwell in that uncertainty to such an extent that it paralyzes us. So Babro's answer would be, we do the things we do because we live in a world of uncertainty, and given that uncertainty, we have to use probability to determine what we can and what we should do, to determine how we interact with each other. Some of the work that we've seen coming out of health communication, I've done a little bit of work looking at problematic integration in the lived experiences of men men facing prostate cancer and their partners. Men who are diagnosed with prostate cancer all of a sudden have to come face to face with that reminder that their futures are uncertain. and they often have to engage in a different kind of narrative sense making of their experiences to accommodate for that uncertainty. Um, their partners often have to do that as well. Again, even people who are getting on in age and who are thinking about their mortality have to think about it a little differently when a chronic illness becomes part of the picture. And for people who study the impact of illness on family interactions, then problematic integration becomes a theory that's a useful one for looking at things like making sense of illness and dealing with end of life decisions. I couldn't resist the urge to mention this theory because it's one that, again, I think would be useful for some people, even though it doesn't come up in every family communication textbook. It's a theory that has applicability across the board. I think in interpersonal communication, I think even in organizational communication. If you think about what something like the COVID crisis did to businesses in our culture, that we saw that businesses had to deal with the uncertainty of not knowing how long the COVID pandemic was going to last or how the government and private industry were going to respond to it. The Some companies thrived because they were able to integrate that uncertainty into their worldviews, and some didn't. Again, it's a theory that has applicability across the board, but in case it doesn't come up in any other classes for you, I think that problematic integration is a theory that you might find interesting. If you have any other questions about it, I would welcome the chance to talk to you about it in more detail. Thanks.